Welcome everyone to Detection Done Differently with Horizon 3. Um, really excited to have everyone here today. We'll start off with a couple of quick intros for me and Travis, and then we'll talk about, the overall detection landscape, the problems that we're seeing, why we care about this. We'll talk about, what is needed in a new approach. And then finally, we will talk about our new product and how it addresses these problems. And of course, Q&A will be at the end. In the meantime, feel free to drop in your questions in the Q&A session, and we'll definitely address them at the end. All right. So a little bit about me. My name is Jing. I am a senior PM here at Horizon 3. I have been here for about 4 months. I was previously at Spotify helping to build out a new product to help Spotify diversify its revenue streams. Have spent some time before that at various startups. Actually started my career as a tech journalist where I covered the financial stuff and the cool new technologies that people were working on. And I covered companies like IBM as well as the New York tech startup scene. Travis, over to you.
Thanks, Jing. My name's Travis Falgren. You can see on there, Senior Offensive Security Expert. I did 20 years in the military. And during that, I was lucky enough to do a pretty good smattering of different jobs. And towards the end of my career, I finished off, I was doing offensive cyber as well as defensive cyber there for the end of it. Upon retiring from the military, I joined Horizon 3 as one of the founding engineers. And I've been here working with all these wonderful people since that started. So let's move on and see what we got.
Let's see what we got. So, why are we even here today? Let's face it, the detection tools of today just aren't cutting it. We're not actually getting better at threat detection and response. On average, breaches take about 6 to 7 months to identify and then another 2 to contain. This is the same as it was since 2017, so we've not improved. However, costs have increased by 20% in the last 5 years, and most of that cost increase is actually coming from detection, escalation, and response. One more stat for you guys. A survey in 2022 of RSA attendants showed that 15% of organizations are actually spending millions of dollars a year on threat detection tools. So all of this is saying that you are spending a heck of a lot more than you were previously for little to no return. Let's dive in more with Travis on why these costs are increasing and yet why we're still not effective at threat detection and response.
Thanks, Jing. So yeah, so why are things not getting better, and why is it costing us so much money, right? Well, as you think about it, as times have gone on, things have not been getting simpler at all. Environments are getting much more complex, and that can lead to a lot of gaps in coverage for lots of different reasons. These gaps can be because of the logging complexity that's gone up, legacy equipment that's in your environment, as some of that equipment people don't even know exists. When NodeZero was early on in some of our tests, I remember working with some companies and they found Raspberry Pis in comm closets and things like that they didn't even know existed until NodeZero pointed these things out to them. So this old equipment, the increase in complexity and things that you don't even know just can add breachheads to these environments where attackers can come in and kind of, move on out and start attacking the networks. And it's harder and harder to keep up with that. There's also red tape, right? Now, some of this red tape is needed and some of it, there's a good reason for it. Think of we've worked with a lot of medical clients and things of that nature. These people, they can't just immediately shut down some of these systems and take them offline because people's lives, are depending on some of this type of equipment. And those make very lucrative targets for these bad actors, right? So, and then resource constraints. You're going to hear me harp on that a lot. There's not enough people, and there's not enough people with the experience needed, whether that's from a security standpoint or just the people that know how to set these systems up and maintain them in a secure way. So taking all that into account, attackers are more sophisticated than ever, right? um, these attacks that we're talking about are way in advance of what they were even a few years ago, right? So defense is hard, security is hard. At the end of my military stint, one of the jobs that I was lucky enough to have was I worked on an incident response team, right? I was in charge of some incident responders. And these guys had to keep track of everything. Every alert that goes off in their environment has to be checked, whether it's, you don't know if it's a false positive or not. So every alert has to be checked, right? Every patch that didn't get applied to a system right has to be verified and all those things. Your users are reporting phishing emails. And oh, by the way, a couple of people clicked on these phishing emails. So all that has to be checked into and all those things have to be examined, right? So this asymmetry means that despite best efforts, security teams are always going to be in a disadvantage, and they're always going to be behind the eight ball, right? So the SOC has to investigate everything. So what's something we can do about that, Jing?
Great question. This is actually the question that we have been working on answering over here at H3. But before we get into it, I actually want to hear from you guys. Let's do a poll. And this poll might actually give you some hints as to the direction we ended up going. All right, take a second to answer this poll. We want all the answers we can get.
Yes.
All right, shall we take a look at our results?
Yes. Let's see.
Oh, wow. Okay, almost 50-50. So many of you, it looks like, have actually used deception before, and most of you have not. I would love if anyone would love to volunteer to talk about their experience, if you don't mind dropping it in the chat. Any of you can just drop in a couple of lines. We'll read them out loud. I'd love to see, what you thought, what your feedback was. And so, yeah, so while we're waiting for that, this is the problem that we were thinking about and we've been working on answering. And as we thought through this problem, we kind of identified two things that we thought were important to solve the problem. One is that, we needed to make sure that whatever tool we would offer is something that alerts you of actual malicious activity rather than adding more noise, right? As Travis said before, lots of noise, lots of craziness, lots of things that you have to account for. And the second thing that was really important is a tool that doesn't require a lot of setup, doesn't require maintenance, and so avoiding adding new workload to your already very overworked teams. And so for that former, right, this is where we landed on deception, hence the poll. Let's see, anyone wanted to share their experiences? Okay, well, I guess we're a shy crew here. That's all right. Um, let's talk about deception. As you may know, deception in cybersecurity refers to a set of strategies and technologies that output things that look and feel as if they belong in your network. So, assets, files, things like that. They're designed to, lure attackers, mislead attackers, and enable you to detect intrusions more accurately and more quickly. So, Travis, can you tell us a little bit more about why an org might want to use this technology?
Yeah. Thanks, Jing. Appreciate that. So you remember you're vulnerable until you're fixed, right? So that's something that we like to harp on. You're that's still there until everything's been resolved. And all those things have been investigated and cleared out, right? So why do we use detection and deception technologies, right? So one thing, if you look there, I got up there, so early breach detection. So you can kind of focus your attention on these things that are with fewer false positives, and you can have something kind of watching this that needs to be watched. It's kind of the mantra of NodeZero, fixing what needs mattered. And we're going to try and bring that to deception technology, right? So you get some efficiency gains. So you get automated detection with these types of technologies if they're done right. And then you can concentrate on the analysis and on responding to those things that need fixed. And all of that combined, it directly leads to quicker containment, right? Because if you know what the problem is, you know where the problems are, you can address them. And it places a little bit more of the burden on attackers. Attackers must now avoid tripping things that are in place in addition to your other defensive products, right? And it increases their operational complexity. And anytime we can kind of put some of that complexity onto the bad guy versus onto us, that's a great thing. And this is the type of technology that really allows us to do some of that, right? And it also gives what I like to call, it's a little cheesy, but the defender's edge in this, right? So security teams gain an advantage by turning the network into a sensor grid, almost like a spider web with this type of technology, using all the tools that you have available to you. How do you think we can do this though without increasing our workload? That's really the key, because if I'm making things more difficult for our users or for people out there, then that's not really gonna help anybody. What do you think, Jane?
Great question. Um, the answer is honestly very short and sweet. Automation is the key. So deception is great and all, but as Travis alluded to, you still have to know how to set it up. So how can we automate all of these tasks that your team would have had to take on, you know? And that, my friends, is a really great entry point into NodeZero Tripwires. Travis, tell us more.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Gene. Yeah, we're very, very excited about this. So today, up until now, NodeZero has acted like a sophisticated attacker in your network, right, in your environment. And now it's going to go even further, though, and it's going to find those vulnerabilities that we have always found with it, but it's going to act as a scout for you. So it's going to place tripwires in these vulnerable points in your environment that it knows are vulnerable because we've just found exploitable weaknesses in that environment. So they're not just being placed with no care or anything like that. And just as I've been talking about over and over again with this of resource constraints, and how Jing is mentioning automation, no zero tripwires isn't going to increase your workload, right? You don't have to go out there and become the expert to know where these need to be placed or even to place them or work on the monitoring pieces of it, right? NodeZero is going to do that for you. So you're going to go out there, you're going to fix those gaps. We're going to give you that flexibility and that time to do it. And NodeZero is going to stand the watch for you. You want to show them, Jing?
Definitely. All right. So we're going to dive deeper into the product, but before we get there, just to, revisit that problem that we were trying to solve and how we're solving it. With NodeZero Tripwires, we're automating all of the hard parts for you. So we're automating the deployment of tripwires and putting them where it matters based on what we NodeZero have found to be exploitable. We're making sure that once these tripwires are deployed, there's no maintenance needed on your end. And then, of course, we're always listening for activity so that if there is a malicious actor, then we are immediately alerting you of that fact, right? So a tool that, automates all the hard bits and a tool that makes sure to minimize noise and minimize false positives. That's exactly what we're going for. All right, let's get into it. So what does this actually look like? So you can see here that when you run a pen test, an internal, external phishing impact, or a relevant rapid response test, in your pen test setup, there is a toggle that you can hit to enable NodeZero to automatically drop these tripwires for you during the pen test. That's all you have to do. Hit a toggle, and then let's go. Once that pen test is complete, you'll be able to see in your pen test results whether there were tripwires dropped. If you click on that module, that will take you to a list of all of the tripwires that were dropped during the pen test and all of the information that you might need about it. So if you click on the individual tripwire, you'll be able to see exactly, where it is located, the file path, and the specific information about the asset where it has been dropped. I will take a quick pause here to also talk about the types of tripwires that we are offering. So as some of you have mentioned, you've used honeypots before, you used honey files before. Our tripwires today are closer to honey files and honey tokens. We have 3 types of tripwires. You can see here the AWS credential file. This is, a set of keys that is in a file that gets dropped into your environment, and they actually are real AWS keys. So when an attacker, stumbles upon those keys, they'll see it and they'll absolutely want to use them, right? And when they try to authenticate using these keys, that will actually talk back to Horizon 3 owned infrastructure, where we will detect that activity and generate an alert off of it. The second type of tripwire is a Windows suspicious process monitor. That is only on Windows machines where we basically create registry keys that will monitor for specific processes that only a malicious actor might run on that Windows machine. So your typical user wouldn't, for instance, run sysinfo, but a malicious actor might. And so we're monitoring for that. And when we see that process being run, that is what will trigger the alert. And finally, we have the MySQL dump file, which looks like and is a MySQL dump file. And an attacker who stumbles on that file is definitely going to want to get their hands on it. They might exfiltrate that data, and then when they import or try to load that file, that is what will trigger the alert. Cool. Moving on, I want to point out here that you'll see that, yes, each tripwire comes with its own deletion instructions. This is really critical because, as you may know, NodeZero is not it is an agentless solution and does not actually persist in your environment. And so once we've dropped the tripwires and the pen test is complete, we have no way of reaching back into your environment, and that is by design, which means that should you wish to remove the tripwire, that is the part that you would have to do. We are working on solutions to that, but I did want to call that out as it is designed. Next up, I am going to show you guys how an alert looks. So you can see here that each tripwire can actually be tested. And when you test a tripwire, it actually simulates the action that an attacker might take to trigger a tripwire. So it may take, as you can see, a little bit to come through. When there is a new alert, you will see this within the application, and you will be able to take a look at the alert. Each alert comes with all of the information that we have about the actor who took the action. So you can see here that, this actor triggered this AWS credentials file by taking these actions. And we also include all of the tripwire details as well, so that you know exactly where this action happened and which host was therefore potentially compromised, which asset was potentially compromised. We also include a link here that takes you to all of the potential impacts, all of the potential ways in which this host might have been compromised that we found during the pen test to help you with your investigation. And of course, with each alert, we send out emails as well as events if you've connected a SIM via our webhook connections. And that pretty much concludes my demo for today. If you have questions or if you want more information, feel free to email info@horizon3.ai. And of course, if you want a deeper demo, feel free to reach out to our sales team or go to this website here. All right. Let's jump into Q&A, shall we? What questions do we have?
We got a question. We are in the process of purchasing NodeZeros. Is Tripwires included or a separate purchase?
Great question. So it is not included in the core NodeZero product. So it is available as an add-on purchase. Believe that we are currently pricing it per live tripwire and available in bundles of 100.
We had a question from Andrew I want to answer. So are you recommending to not patch holes and place tripwire instead? No, Andrew, we will never tell you to not patch your systems. But just as we were going over some of the things in there, such as red tape or different pieces that can kind of prolong the patching cycle, that's kind of what we're talking about in regards to this, laying down these tripwires with NodeZero in those known points, so that way you can fix it and you don't have to worry about these intrusions coming up behind you and sneaking up on you, so to speak. And just because a lot of attack paths are patched, they're still good attack routes, if that makes sense. They're still, as an attacker, things that I would look at as when I'm doing my recon or going to look, because these are kind of areas that I would want to target and attack. So we're going to cover your bases while you're fixing it, and then we're going to continue watching you after the fact as well. I hope that answers that question.
I'm not sure. I typed a question answer, so I'm not sure if it went through, but there are how many tripwires are there altogether? There are 3 types currently: the AWS credentials, the Windows Suspicious Process Monitor, and the MySQL dump. Not sure if that answers the question fully, but if there's a follow-up, feel free to ask as well. Okay, next question from Jason, moving back to the original list. How would this compare to a Stingbox, and would it work in conjunction, or could it work in conjunction with that type of device and defenses? Great question. So a Stingbox is a physical honey pot, which is not actually currently what tripwires are. And so a Stingbox, from my perspective, acts more like a full maybe asset, or a set of an actual full asset as part of the network, and could come with additional layers of deception on top of that. Right now we are just offering that one layer of deception via the tokens, and we would drop them in whichever assets are exploitable. In terms of in conjunction with, could tripwires work in conjunction with those devices and defenses? Potentially, yes, but no special considerations as of right now for that. Next question, could tripwires be run separately? Does it need to be run in conjunction with a pen test? Currently, you would need to drop tripwires in conjunction with a pen test, but we are working on improvements to our product that would enable you to drop tripwires in, say like your crown jewels, and not necessarily part of a full pen test. If a tool is agentless and you don't have access to the environment after the pen test, how does the tripwire communicate? How is this tested without two-way communication? Do you want to answer that, Travis, or do you want me to answer that?
Sure. So part of it depends on the types of tripwires as well. So if you think about the AWS account one, for example. So we have a key that we are placing down, which is an AWS credential, a valid credential for an AWS account, not yours, but one that we place and we own. And at that point, if a user goes and hopefully uses that, because if I was an attacker and I see some AWS credentials lying around, I'm going to try them. And when they use those, then that will trigger it, and it will go back through that same process and come out, if that makes sense. So it's not using your network for connection in those regards. So, yep.
Exactly. If there are follow-ups, feel free to drop them in. I want to make sure we get through all the questions as much as we can.
How does NodeZero decide where to deploy the tripwire in your network? So that's one of the really cool things that the way we're treating tripwires versus just giving you tripwires to go out there and place in your environment. Yes, you could, in theory, get some fruit by just sowing seeds out everywhere, but the fact that NodeZero goes through and these are vulnerabilities that are in your network. So this is a place that definitely needs to be watched, where we know that if there wasn't a tripwire there and you weren't aware of this vulnerability, if an attacker was to come in and use that, it's going to lead to bad things for your network, right? So we're doing 2 things. One, we're covering that gap so that you can fix it, so that you know this very specific valid weakness is not just out flapping in the breeze, and giving you that time to do it so that you can kind of have that warm fuzzy, if that makes sense. Let's see.
I think the next question is tripwires included in the NFR license? We will be enabling demoing via the NFR license for tripwires, but it is not an included product for use, if that makes sense. How do we get notifications of triggered tripwires? Can this be integrated with ticketing? So within the product today, you will get a notification via email. That email will get sent to the org admin, as well as any users who you've granted Tripwire access to. And it will also appear in the portal like I showed just now. And then finally, this is a question that I'll answer to MF as well. We currently support, we are working on additional connections, but we currently support webhook connection with Splunk Cloud. And so if you set up a webhook connection to your Splunk Cloud instance, then Tripwire alerts will also send to your SIM via that webhook. Can it be integrated with ticketing? It currently does not have any ticketing integrations, but if like if you have feedback there, we would love to hear it.
And I would say with the integrations with things such as Splunk Cloud, if you're further behind that using SOAR technologies and stuff like that, I mean, all these things are well within the realm of possibility to go off of those. So, and we also internally to H3 plan on hopefully expanding these things as well. So,
Once I place the tripwire, does it count toward my monthly IP pen test count? Um, the tripwire does not count toward your IP pen test count, as it'll be part of the pen test during which it will drop. The tripwire itself counts toward your allocation of tripwires. So like I mentioned, for let's say you buy 100, right? If the tripwire gets dropped, then it counts against your tripwire allocation, not your IP allocation. Pricing ballpark figure for 100 of these. Let's see. I actually am not certain. I think you should talk to your salesperson about that. Sorry. Um, Subsequent pen tests by Horizon 3 automatically removed during the next pen test if the vulnerability has been remediated. At this time, removing tripwires is a manual process. I will answer the second question first, which is that yes, at this time, removing of all tripwires is a manual process. For subsequent pen tests, why would we not remove them? It is because, we believe that they are valuable as I think there are a few reasons for this. One is that we wouldn't want to automatically remove something from your environment if didn't want us to remove it. Even if if you remediated the vulnerability for that host, does not necessarily mean that you wouldn't want that layer of protection there. If you don't, that's a really great piece of feedback, I think, that we're considering for sure in terms of how we might be able to remove tripwires, but I don't think that we would automatically do so. Next question, risk
what
score
risk
or
ranking for prioritization can be applied to findings in H3 AI? Not 100% sure I understand the question on if that's in regard to tripwires or if it's just in regard to the weaknesses or findings in general. I don't believe we're not modifying a weakness based on the ability to lay down a tripwire with it, because those weaknesses, the ability, those things are already associated with those. Like a lot of things that give us that ability are already highlighted that they do. So I think that's kind of what you got. If I'm wrong, though, feel free to follow up, and I would be more than happy to fill in further on that, though.
awesome.
Gavin, is this for all honeypots, network, app, data, and cloud, etc.? So right now, the three types that Jing mentioned were the three that we're putting down with expansions and that hopefully coming, but it's only for use within the Horizon 3 environment and Splunk Cloud currently. But
Or I'm
again,
wondering if the question is more about like where those tripwires get dropped.
it's possible.
Yeah.
Well,
So So tripwires today will effectively be dropped in assets where it should potentially could exist, right? So the Windows process monitor, for instance, obviously would not exist in a Linux host. AWS credentials could be dropped in, for instance, like shares, SMB shares, NFS shares, and then same with MySQL dump files, like they would be dropped in those assets that sort of make sense. I don't know if that answers the question, but feel free to follow up. Tanner, this is really cool. Thank you for that. Appreciate the feedback. Do tripwires appear in a report? Today, the tripwires will appear in the pen test results report, as I showed during the demo. However, all tripwires that have ever been dropped will also appear in that table that I showed you guys next. That table is under the main tripwires tab, and you'll see that it can manage and see all of your tripwires. You'll be able to see, when it was dropped. You'll be able to see which pen test it was dropped in, and you'll be able to see the different types all presented there. Tripwire documentation. So there is documentation on each tripwire on how to remove it. For the MySQL dump files and AWS credentials, it tells you where that file is located in which host so that you can go and delete it. Currently, no commands available. For the Windows Suspicious Process Monitor, there is a pastable chunk of commands that you can run to automatically then delete all of those keys if that is what you wish. Communication for Windows Process Monitor. So the way that works is it is creating, so if someone runs the process, that triggers us to do a DNS callback to Horizon 3, and that is how we would know that that activity has happened. So in that DNS callback, it'll include information like what process was run, obviously the IP would be the host itself, and then, relevant information that came with that callback as well. The user information, for instance. Are tripwires GDPR compliant? As far as I understand it, they should be GDPR compliant, as we are not storing any, additional data from your environment that didn't already exist within the rest of the Horizon 3 core product. So as it pertains to like data deletions and stuff, it would be part of that process as well. I hope that answers your question. Awesome. Question from Gavin, how would this compete with Arctic Wolf Managed Risk offering? Quite frankly, I'm actually not sure what that offering exactly is, and we'll look into that and let you know. Awesome. I think those are all the questions. Did we miss any?
I think so. I'm looking through. I very much thank you, everyone who attended and all the questions. That was very, very good. Make sure we didn't miss any of you.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for attending, for participating, for asking great questions, and for providing that feedback. This is a new product for us. We love to hear feedback. So, feel free to ping us. And it was really, really great to share this with you guys today.